If you didn't understand before, I hope you understand now. Because you're now listening to the We Talking podcast brought to you by Island Girl Team. This podcast, we are literally talking about every and anything with your girl, Kamilah Gumbs. So subscribe from wherever you get your podcast and get ready to talk. Welcome to season 2, episode 6 of the We Talking podcast. In today's episode, we have Dr. Henry Wallace Charles, and we're going to be talking about youth development and children's rights in the Caribbean. And so a quick biography for Dr. Charles. Dr. Henry Wallace Charles is a mentor and motivational speaker, child's rights researcher and advisor, lecturer, social protection advocate, social policy analyst, social justice youth development researcher, and practitioner. He is also an internationally recognized youth and policy development expert with over 30 years of practice. He is currently a senior program specialist child resilience with UNICEF the Netherlands. He served as a lead consultant for the Caribbean Development Bank's first youth policy and operational strategy. He is a founding member of the St. Lucia National Youth Council and served as a public relations officer and vice president, respectively, between 1985 and 1991. He is also the founding member and served as the secretary/treasurer of the Caribbean Federation of Youth from 1987 to 1989. He is a member of the Department of Behavioral Sciences at the University of West Indies Child and Youth Research Cluster. He has also served as a member of the advisory board for the Caribbean Regional Youth Council. Dr. Charles is a former regional director of the Commonwealth Youth Program Caribbean Center, as well as a former interim director of the Youth Affairs Division of the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. Dr. Charles is a holder of PhD in social policy from Sally's UE St. Augustine. His thesis explored the social political context of youth and policy development within the Caribbean. He has provided technical support to several Caribbean governments and youth development stakeholders on youth and policy development strategy. He has authored and presented several academic and technical papers on youth empowerment, youth participation, and the social political context of youth development, youth governance, youth economic empowerment, and the professionalization of youth development work. Additionally, he has undertaken and contributed to several youth development initiatives in the Caribbean, including mapping of the best practices of youth engagement for the UNDP Barbados and the OECS in 2012, being part of multidisciplinary team that undertook an assessment of the youth development situation in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean on behalf of USAID, review of Grenada and Dominica's Turks and Caicos Island, Belize, and Trinidad and Tobago national youth policies, facilitating Angola's 8th National Youth Development Conference, conducting an institutional review of the Division of Youth Affairs and formulating a youth development strategy for Tobago House of Assembly, developing course outline and modules for the MSc in Child and Youth Studies for the Department of Behavioral Sciences as UE St. Augustine, instructional designer for 3 Bachelor of Science in Youth Department work courses. Mr. Charles was also a chief of party for USAID-funded assessment of the youth development situation in Haiti. He is a part-time lecturer in both of Masters of Education in Youth Guidance and Master of Science in Child and Youth Studies at UE St. Augustine campus. He also served as a member of the Caribbean Development Bank Youth Policy and Strategy Reference Group. As someone with an extensive career, what motivated you to get into the field of youth development and child rights?
I think, well, in a way, what would have motivated me to get involved? Well, I got into the youth development and those areas, but from very early, well, I was born in an era where it was just the whole independence movement in the Caribbean, as well as the national liberation movements in Africa, some parts of Asia was taking place. It was also a time where there was a lot of struggles in some of the Latin American countries. A struggle against the US domination and dictatorships that were taking place. And so you had that independence movement, you had the national liberation movement. In fact, I was born the very year of the Cuban Revolution.
Oh, nice.
And so very early, and I did not born into privilege then. I was born, from basic working class, family parents. So I know the struggle in terms of having to go and fend in terms of going to climb, the various trees to get your food or to plant your garden and those kinds of things. So from very early, that kind of socialization, very early in my life, I became quite aware of who I was in terms of what is my class position, in terms of my social class, and that I had to struggle. I was fortunate that I went to the leading secondary school at the time, in St. Lucia and that kind of thing. But even there, it was a place where you came face to face with the dynamics and the contradictions of the society, because being the premier secondary school at the time, and perhaps the only male secondary school at the time, that is where you had the children of the bourgeoisie, children of the elites, as well as the working class children who came from some in rural communities, poor rural communities, some who came from ghetto communities in the city. So that kind of, I think it's that kind of socialization that very early had me attracted to certain types of literature. Literature looking at the struggles of persons across the world, focusing on indeed some of the own struggles, civil rights and others in the United States. And of course, at the time too, it was a situation where many of us were rebelling against what we saw as the association of the dominant religions like the Catholic Church and thing with some of the oppressive forces. We knew about the role that they had played in Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia and that kind of a thing. And so we were between rebelling in there and also stepping out. So a number of young people going out of that thing. And of course, so we also some of us got attracted and were, elated by the fact that there was emerging a new theology at that time, which was called liberation theology, especially in Latin America and some of those areas there. So that whole social conscience, that whole thing exposed you to wanting to be involved at the community level. And so by the time I left St. Mary's College very early, I was approached by, persons in my community. There was a club and became a member of the club, and very quickly they trusted me with the leadership of that club. And of course, like I said, as the situation evolved, what it came then I got involved in a national kind of struggle to get the development and establishment of a national youth council. Very early. I just left school when it started that whole process. There was a national youth council. It had become moribund. The leaders who owned it had been there for a while and nothing was happening. They had outgrown any. I don't think there was any indication of youth. You couldn't use any indicator, the age, everything had gone. And so we started, myself and number started struggle to try and kind of rescue the National Youth Council from them. Of course, they outmaneuvered us because we had the energy, we had the passion, but we were not yet so schooled in a lot of the intricacies of those things. So they outmaneuvered us. And we continued that struggle, myself, very prominent role in it, until we were able to establish the St. Lucia National Youth Council in 1985. And when the council was established in 1985, it immediately came under serious hostility from the government, but not necessarily the government on the whole. It was the particular Minister of Youth, So the
Oh,
National Youth
wow.
Council was formed, it was formed on Sunday, the 14th of April, 1985. The following morning, Monday morning, in the first major news item of the day was an item where the minister says he was not going to recognize the National Youth Council because a bunch of radicals had taken over the council and whatever.
Wow.
Well, I guess it was to try and intimidate us, but we were not going to be intimidated. But we were grounded. We were not young people who were just, we were grounded. I mean, our whole consciousness was heightened by, like I said, what we read, what we knew, the struggles for independence, working class struggle. In fact, so much so that the same year that the council was formed, and I had become an executive member of the council, that very year, a couple months later, I was also elected as the general secretary of the largest public sector union in St. Lucia as I was 27 years at the time, so because of that kind of thing. So I spent that time, we were in the movement, we recognized that we saw the shortcomings of the state agencies. And so we did a lot of work to fill the gap, from a council standpoint. Then I transitioned into the trade union movement, fully. The thing moved me, but also always bearing in mind, also always engaging in terms of the whole youth movement. And then subsequently, at some point after I left St. Lucia. I didn't want to work with the government in terms of some social protection programs where we were trying to get employment or social protection measures for especially challenging backgrounds, social impacted by economic marginalization and social exclusion. And so coming out of that, I then went on to, I got the appointed as the regional director of the Commonwealth Youth Program. The Commonwealth, as you would know, is a body, an association of the colonized and former colonies. And so one of the things they had done way back in 1973 was to establish what we call the Commonwealth Youth Program. The idea was a Commonwealth-wide agency that would support those former colonies emerging into independence in terms of creating opportunities for young people. Of course, young people being those who should take the mantle of independence, all of these lofty speeches, right? And so that is so I became, in fact, became the regional director of the Commonwealth Youth Program. And they got, it was almost like I'd just taken a break from fully involving youth, and I got into it, and it became like, it was like, I had not taken a break at all. It was just things. So, started doing work with, especially with governments, trying to help them to kind of modernize the youth departments, to take a different approach, because in terms of youth development, what we had traditionally, although it still lingers on, is a deficit kind of perspective, a deficit approach, where young people were seen and treated as problems to be resolved, as people who are danger unto the society, a threat to the society, and our jobs as youth workers was to rescue society or rescue them. And I never subscribed to that. In fact, I spent a stint as a counselor at the Boys Rehabilitation Center, and I left. I left to go full-time in the union precisely because of that. I don't think they understood what was needed. So that once I got into the Commonwealth, I started to promote the whole idea, two approaches. The strengths-based approach was one. Let us focus and build on what are the strengths. How do we assist young people develop the navigational capacities for them to, to survive and to think on. And of course, even when it was not officially embraced, I was one of those who was advocating for a social justice approach. In fact, people at the time said, "Well, you were taking a very political position." But what they describe as political, really and truly, what it was, I was clear in my mind. I think I may have come that through my own class background. I was clear in my mind that creating opportunities for young people was not adequate. We needed to understand what were the needs and the priorities that young people had. Why young people were not benefiting from the goods, so to speak, of the society. And recognizing that these things are influenced by more structural issues, issues of power and power relationships, who dominates and who controls power. Like I say, I always speak of the triangle: power at the top, politics and policy at the base, and they have this relationship. So I was very much aware of that. And so I was always focusing on, hey, yes, we're talking about what is amelioration, the things we can do to ameliorate the situation facing young people. But we will keep doing that unless and until we deal in a significant way with the structural inequalities. We deal with things like reconfiguring the power relationships, or what I call the equilibrium, creating an equilibrium in power rather than the existing disequilibrium that there. So that was the kind of thing. Of course, I made a name for myself, so to speak, because people started to really realize what I was saying. The other thing I think people really surprised people is that I was saying those things in official circles. And well, quickly, I think I recognized that I had a gift I could only call it that, a gift, because I was saying those things, but I was not saying them in any way I was angry or anything. I was just laying it. And I still do up to now. That's how I still think on. And so coming out of that, I think that experience in the Commonwealth, you have a tour of duty. It's not like you stay on a tour of duty. When I finished that, I think it was in 2012, January 2012, I finished my tour of duty. And then I decided, look, you know something? I think I will just be independent. And so I've been doing a lot of my work in youth development, well, advocacy, a bit in academia and those things, but also doing some consultancies in terms of, helping countries develop their youth policy and well, children and things. So, and in fact, increasingly got, there's always been the link, because I keep saying to people all the time, when we speak of youth, there are a couple of things that, one, there is no one size fits all. That youth is a heterogeneous construct and not a homogeneous construct. So issues of intersectionality become very critical. But I always keep emphasizing the fact that when we speak of youth, most countries say youth is, some say 10 to this, 14 to this. I say children. The definition of children under the Convention on the Rights of the Child also speaks to children being in that group. So increasingly, I also be speaking about the thing of children. And then I was asked to, there's a course at the university called it's a master's degree program, postgraduate master's, children and youth studies. It's a master's degree. And so I was asked, I was invited to help build a course in terms of, do a lot of development, and asked to teach. I think I teach 4 of the courses in there: child rights policy into practice, engaging children and young people, the social context of child and youth care, and the other one is interventions and assessment in child and youth development. So that, whilst already having that expansive thing in youth, that also made me get a deeper thing into the more specific areas of child rights and child rights education and all of this. And then, so that by the time the UNICEF, the Netherlands, was doing this program, I was called and said, hey, some colleagues in St. Martin from the Department of Youth said, hey, we need you on the ground for this, so why don't you So I
Mm-hmm.
did, and they said, okay, so that's my focus a lot in that area. And in fact, I'm now a member. We have at the Department of Behavioral Sciences at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine. We have just
Mm-hmm.
developed, late last year, we developed a cluster, which is Child and Youth Research Cluster. We had a panel discussion for International Children's Day. We're having a meeting coming up soon. So we want to have a conference, an academic conference
Oh, wow.
later this year, call for papers and all of that kind of thing, Yeah. So that has been it. The advocacy, doing the professional consultancy work, doing some publication. In fact, I just got word that myself and some colleagues, we have a thing that is coming out, an edited. Let me see if I get that quickly. An edited. Let me see. Yeah, edited. It's called Youth Participation in the Caribbean, Politics and Development. So a number of us have articles. There are about 11 essays, articles in it. So that kind of work, has been. And of course, I have done youth policies in several countries: Anguilla, Trinidad and Tobago, Dominica, Grenada, Turks and Caicos Islands. A number of those countries have actually. Yeah. So that has really put me on the thing in terms of youth and children development. Yeah.
Oh, wow. No, that's really good. And honestly, I think it's really important, especially for someone that's kind of interested in ensuring there's a lot more academic papers and research about us in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
I really find it is really cool that, we having those type of papers, those type of research in regards of at least children and youth and from all different aspects in the Caribbean. And so moving on to my second question, and I know you mentioned, working for UNICEF Netherlands and stuff. And with UNICEF, we have the Convention of the Rights of the Child. So, of course, it is important for us to acknowledge and highlight the convention. And we do it every November. We have programs, everything going on. But how can the government, educators, and other children workers actually put the convention to practice instead of just celebrating every November like we usually do?
But it's a very important, interesting and important question. Because I think the UN system itself, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I mean, is the most ratified convention of all of the United Nations conventions. That does not, however, mean that, like I say, everybody who's ratified it is showing the commitment and the dedication towards things. Yeah. Far from that. There are some things that I can say there's been sufficient awareness and people. So, for instance, there are issues that where people, the emotional response has reached such a scale that people are kind of trying to adhere. So things like children, protection of children in circumstances of conflict and whatever. Over the years, they've kind of been a thing where people kind of, especially among states engaging states in warfare. There's a kind of a thing of obligation to try not to think children. That is very fragile, because sometimes they get away with atrocities and whatever. Increasingly, as conflict is not necessarily a state versus state, but states versus non-states or non-states versus non-states, that becomes, let's look at the situation, for instance, regarding the Rohingya people in Myanmar. I mean, those persons are virtually very ethnic cleansing and the children all involved. Let's look at the situation with the response of the Western European countries towards the people that are trying to migrate from Africa in the boats. The thing. Let us look at the people lined up on the western border of the United States. I mean, look at the example of how the children were locked up in cages and so they have all of those issues. At a national level, and I use the Caribbean, in many of those countries, I think sufficient work. Now, there's been stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think sufficient work has been done to really ground this notion of children's rights. So the conventions are ratified. I am teaching students here now. I mean, I'm talking about students. I'm not talking about, students who just left primary school. I'm talking about students who are working, who are teachers. And when I start to speak of things like duty bearers and rights holders, I mean, like some of them, that is the first time. They know that thing about children are special, this kind of iffy kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the idea of they are duty bearers,
Mm-hmm.
and by the very fact that the state has signed or ratified that convention, that they are obligated, whether they know it or not, to create, that kind of. So there is that absence, there's that ignorance, that absence of information. And that is happening in an environment where traditionally children were perceived as property.
Yeah.
As property, and therefore, the thing. In fact, there are several, things that people tell you when you talk about the rights, and you have to explain to them. Like, I mean, I was in teaching a class, and a teacher said to me, "But if you're going to think the rights of the child, that's going to make the situation difficult for teachers, because children will now feel they don't have no respect for teachers." And I was saying, no.
Nope.
If you are dealing with rights education is an all-inclusive, embracing thing. If you are going to demonstrate, to teach rights, and you're going to talk about children's rights, what you're doing is also making the child or the young person aware that they too have an obligation to respect the rights of other people.
Yep.
So they were those things. So now the UN has a group of experts that do the periodic review. They call a periodic review of the implementation of the thing. And since 2000 and when, boy, I can't remember now, but a few years now, they recognize that, it's fluctuating, some better, some others, all challenges. And what they did, they then took a decision at that meeting where they came up with a thing called the GMI, the General Measures of Implementation. And those measures of implementation are that's one instrument. I'll give you another one. A number of things that they put up saying that if governments follow those, they will be able to further entrench the concept and ideas of children's rights and participation. One, for instance, is to ensure, to do a review and assessment of every legislation or policy to make sure it furthers rather than undermines the rights of children, or to see how does it impact children. Another one is the whole concept. Well, it's part of the principles of things that they have. That the question of participation. As I say to the students most times is that, look, there are three broad categories of rights in the convention. The what we call the survival and development rights, that speaks to all of the things of economic and nutrition and those things and whatever, education, whatever. And there are the protection rights that speaks to protection in terms of no harm to the child and all of those things. And then you have the participation rights, which I say are the gateway to the two other groupings of rights. Because the only way you're going to get children to benefit fully from the protection rights or from the survival and development is if they are participating. That's another area. So the idea of ensuring that children are participating, and then from the Caribbean standpoint, there are some of the principles that you have to keep reminding governments. One, I think there's one that they have a little more in the head. One of the principles of the convention, that of what's the best interest of the child. Do what is the best interest. Although there's more lip service than there is really thing about. Then there's the other one which we have to keep reminding them is about the whole principle of the non-derogability, meaning that you cannot postpone the child's rights because of some disaster. As a matter of fact, it's a disaster or tragedy that you should be even more because of the vulnerability on those things. So I suspect sometimes governments get embarrassed because when they have those meetings, they are to do on reports they submit. Civil society sometimes do those reports and submit the reports and do some of this. But in the UN system, well, in the thing, they are not a body of sanctions. So you might get embarrassed. And I think so the way UNICEF and them have approached it is to say, okay, we do not believe that, well, except in terms of war where people, using children as whatever. We do not believe that it's deliberate. So they focus more on trying to build capacity. Build capacity. Another tool that they use, there's a tool that we call the country context analysis. So if you're going into a country and you want to do some interventions around children, you need to do an assessment of the environment, a number of them. What are some of the major challenges? What are some of the opportunities? What are some of the emerging or current opportunities? Do the causal analysis, what may be contributing to certain things and those things. So it can be complex and it requires that constant political will. And I think that is where the political will on a constant sustainable level is always, it ebb and flow. So this government comes in office, they may be a very energetic minister, or in this country, you may have a civil society organization that is very energetic and they go be out there. Sometimes they get ostracized, they get stigmatized. So it's a constant battle. It really is. And so that is why I say to my students who do the master's degree, I say, I understand it. You at UE, you're doing a postgrad program. I know you've invested in this, and I know your focus is on passing the exam to get your degree. But I also try to match that with being in the field, knowing the challenges, trying to get you to become a better professional. Don't go back in there just perpetuating the same nonsense. Come understand what is your obligations. When you say duty bearer, and starting to say to them that given our whole the judicial processes, that we are becoming more litigious in our society, it will come a stage where young people or lawyers acting on behalf of young people will start to take public officers to task for being negligent of performing the public duty. So that is where we are. It's a challenging period. It's a period that requires far more advocacy. There's not sufficient advocacy. There's not sufficient capacity. And I am of the view that a lot of the agencies, even some of the civil society organizations, require some kind of rejuvenation. I believe a lot of our young people who are coming out of university with appropriate postgraduate degrees, having done research methodology, some of those areas, a social justice approach, issues of intersectionality need we need to invest that kind of social intellectual capital into those areas to transform this. Otherwise, we'll just keep doing the little maintenance and amelioration, not transformation.
Yeah. And I know, like, as someone who's about to go into that postgrad stretch, I know it's very difficult for like a lot of people around my age group. We're like, okay, we want to get into these spaces, but the people who are in these spaces also don't want to leave. And so it's just like, it's like a constant battle. It's like, we're trying to help, we want to help, but you're not giving us the opportunity to help. And then there's the conversation always goes, well, we don't have capacity. Nobody wants to come home when nobody wants to allow people to thrive. And I know you talk about some of the challenges and stuff in regards of that area, working with various governments and stuff with political advantages, etc. So what were like some of the biggest challenges you've actually faced personally, and what way that we can continue working to overcome those type of challenges to make sure that we're advocating for the children, we're advocating for the youth, we're ensuring everyone is having higher quality lives?
I think one of the things is that the knowledge, the awareness, the consciousness still needs a lot of developing.
Mhm.
I think people go back to the default position, which is usually one that is usually one, a deficit perspective of children and young people, that they don't know what they're doing. Participation, active participation of young people is a no-go. That, when you tell them young people should be involved, not just at the end, but in the conceptualization right through. So I think that level of consciousness and understanding and acceptance of seeing young people not as problems to be fixed, but as not even active participants, as co-creators, co-creators of that sustainable future that we talking about. I think there is that. The bigger question, however, in our spaces, especially the Caribbean, is we have a public policy environment that is, wow. Sometimes I quote, there's a thing by, I forget the guy's name, as Howlett Wu and Ramesh and Zhu Howlett Ramesh, remember. They have a text on the public policy primer talking about public policy. And they speak about the public policy environment in the public service. And their description of the public policy environment is akin to a minefield. So that a lot of those things, child and children and youth development, are taking place in a public space, public sector space. They are driven by public sector agencies. And you may have persons in there who mean well. Okay, they may need the capacity, they may need to get a broader understanding and appreciation of children's rights. But the thing is that what is informing that public space? That public space is a product of what I call this equilibrium in power, where we have an elitist approach to power. And that in that space, once it appears that you are championing or promoting approaches that may very well be very successful in achieving what is the core objective, but those approaches may be challenging the status quo in the sense of the power structures, then you walk in a thin line.
Yep.
You walk in a thin line. And so I think many public officers, they self-censor, because, boy, if I put my neck out there, I might get licked up. So the investment is really in trying to do as minimal as possible, or as sufficient to stay under the radar, So a lot of what should be, serious policy that should be transformational is reduced to administrative tick in a box. So when we start to report, well, we had these 5 seminars for the children and so in Pointer and blowing this or that one or whatever, but not beyond that. The fundamental thing is it that children have a more engaged and involved in shaping policy that affects them? Yes or no? They can't answer that question, because that doing that is about contributing to a kind of a restructuring of the power relationships and structure. And public officers could not, some of them may not enjoy the pension if they are perceived to be doing that kind of thing. So I think at the civil society level, because you have to have that kind of skill that you can you can do what you're doing, you can create the awareness. So what I think going forward, there is need for far more solidarity.
Yeah, I agree.
Solidarity in the sense, solidarity among those persons who are in the field, but also, so both horizontal and what I call vertical solidarity in the field, but you have persons who may not. So you have people who are advocating for gender equality. You have people who are advocating for children's rights or young people's rights or youth empowerment and those. You may have in some spaces community leaders who are advocating for better government representation. But what we have allowed ourselves to happen to us is to buy into some of those red herrings and not see ourselves. The emphasis is on the thing that the manifestation of the problem. You know, this is so we fight it, boy. Okay, I know you're doing that thing, Nanda, you're fighting for children's rights. Good luck. But I'm fighting here for gender equality.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Not realizing that all of the manifestations are going back down to the very structural inequalities and the power relationship. And so I think the sooner people see that and people start to build solidarity and say, you know what happened? I is gender, I is this, I is that. But we're fighting is the same system that delivers, and it's that same system that we must transform. You know where that was very thing? I keep saying to people, if you look back at the civil rights movement in the United States of America, for example, Martin Luther King as an example was, chastised and then he was loved. He was loved.
Yeah.
He was loved by whites, by everybody, blacks, everybody.
Yeah.
As soon as, when was Martin Luther King killed? When Martin Luther King went to Birmingham, was it? To take part in the sanitation workers strike.
Yeah, when he was in Memphis.
Memphis, the sanitation workers rights strike. Once they realized Martin Luther King was not just chasing down a thing of just that. He did not see civil rights just as the thing of the race and the whatever, but also a class issue. And he was hand in hand with the working class. The system recognized that he got it, solidarity, and they lick him down. Same thing happened to Angela. Angela was a young, she was a Marxist, young Marxist in the college, making noise, whatever. As soon as Angela started to, herself very early, even before Martin Luther King, make the link between issues of women's rights, issues of all this thing. What did they do with herself and George Jackson and them? They lock her up actually, and they tried to kill her in prison. Luckily, she got out of that, and she's celebrating her 76 or something birthday.
Yeah.
I think so. But solidarity is a thing that we need to go forward.
Yeah.
Because that is the way, that's the only way we could begin to dismantle and restructure what essentially are the factors that are contributing to all of this thing that we see. If we don't want to do that, then we just have to be happy and say, boy, I'm not fit to be in there, but I will just continue to shine the glass and say, well, okay, let's see the glass. Amidst a sandstorm, we will shine it to see how long it will stay clear.
Yep. That's very true. That is honestly very, very true. And I guess that can actually tie into my last question I have for you, because a lot of us younger millennials, older Gen Z, when we're finished with our education or whatever step we're in our life, and we're planning to go into work of advocacy or just simply of youth work, what would be your main advice to give to our generation?
No, be clear. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself first and foremost. Understand that the people you're going to be working with have also the capacity to interpret what is their reality. Yeah. And if assisted, they also know what is contributing to the reality, or you have to assist them in knowing that. And they also capable of transforming the situation if they are given the opportunities. So it is not for us to see ourselves as knights or as sisters in shining armor and coming down like white saviors to save them. Our role is to help them to develop what Paulo Freire called the thing of conscientization, helping create that space so that they begin to think. And to be honest with ourselves and honest with them. Honest with ourselves in that do not take on what you don't have the capacity to take on.
Yeah.
Do not create what they call it, expectations that are unrealistic in things. Okay, it's better to take short steps in this, short steps, accomplish it, and then celebrate and go forward. But beyond that, do not be superficial. Have it, whatever, and if you decide you're going to be, something, I am going to be promoting intersectionality as a thing, to really promote that. Or I am going to do, you have to have more than a working knowledge. You have to have a profound knowledge and understanding of the space that you're in. Profound knowledge and understanding, okay? Because that allows you to speak with such profoundness that even those who may want to ridicule what you say will they will just, it's like what they call it, just like smoke, just thing on. Because the profoundness, they're trying to match your profound analysis or interpretation of a particular phenomena with very shallow things. And it just blows away. Okay? Yep. Very profound, have a profound knowledge and understanding, and to know what are the linkages and that are involved. What are the things that are involved? And of course, like I say, solidarity, building solidarity from the grassroots up, building solidarity, grassroots horizontally, but also sometimes vertically, because there may be people. There are people who may have climbed in different things. They may have been through there. They've reached a thing. Sometimes they may not come and say, hey, we want to assist. But sometimes they approach, they say, wow, they feel, they go say, well, I cannot really, I'm not able to be on the streets with you. I'm not able to be in the gutters or in the trenches but here is what I can share with you in terms of what I think and what I think. Very, 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 and be driven and informed not by fantasies, not by whims and fancies, not by myths and mythologies, but by empiricism, empirical evidence.
That's true.
Evidence. That's all I can say.
That is very true. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it a lot. Yeah. And well, I just said that was my last question, but my last question is tend to be the most off-topic question, just something fun, something light to wrap up this episode with. So of course, you're a man that travels everywhere. You go all over the region. And so out of all the Caribbean islands you visited, lived in, etc., which one is your favorite? And it can't be home.
That's a difficult. Well, I mean, I am very comfortable with Trinidad. I mean, I've lived in Trinidad for a while. Honestly, it's a difficult question to answer. They may have things that I may not feel comfortable with in even my own home. But I think every one of the Caribbean countries, I mean, they're so unique. I mean, I go to Anguilla and work with the people in Anguilla. And for a small country, there is a level of seriousness and professionalism that is unmatched by any. And of course, you have the beaches and, all those, I didn't get to go there, but there is that kind of thing. You go to Jamaica, people say all kind of thing about Jamaica and whatnot. I think there's a kind of a despite what people think, I think there's a kind of a genuine camaraderie that you get, among a wide cross section, especially if you get out of the hustle and bustle in Kingston and those metropole. I mean, survival is a real thing there. So people don't have the kind of time and but you start to go into the communities and you start to get the rural communities, and you could chill out and with the food and whatever. So I mean, all of them have the they're different things. St. Martin itself, I mean, even before now, doing this project, I've been going to St. Martin all the time. And I remember there was a time I said, but you're going to St. Martin, all those meetings. And there's a question that I always in my head. How do people see St. Martin? Do they see St. Martin as a country or as a nation or a destination? You know what I mean? Because, you get so caught up sometimes in just getting into St. Martin. You go Front Street with all the jewelry stores and all the gla and the kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then you might say, but wait a minute, boy, where do people live in? You may forget that. So it's a kind of and then when you start to get around, it's a kind of a uniqueness about the place that, it's like people just on how I call it, boy, people just on the constant on their own vibe kind of thing, that's just
basically.
Yeah, they're on their own vibe, and it's all like I said, man, all the places. The Caribbean, I don't know. They have, like I said, they all have the different thing. I go to Belize. I did quite a bit of work with policy in Belize and things. So another vibe altogether again. It really. But what really I appreciate throughout all of them is the people, the way people, the way people get about and do things. But fundamentally, all of them have some component of the cultural thing that I really, I really appreciate, the way that they do, the way that they live, So, yeah. So that's why I say sometimes I'm a Caribbean man.
No, I'll take that answer for sure. But thank you so much for doing this interview with me today.
No problem.
I truly appreciate it.
Yes.
Is there any way people can reach out to you? Any Facebook, Instagram, any other social media?
Well, I'm on Facebook. It's Henry Wallace Charles on Facebook. I am on Instagram, same thing, Henry. What is it? At Henry Charles. I'm also on LinkedIn. It's mostly Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. That's really where I'm at, Mostly.
Awesome. And thank you so much.
All right.
And
good, yeah.
This is our episode of the We Talking podcast, and I'll see you next time.